Have you ever felt like the conversation around identity, especially, gender, has become incredibly complex, almost to the point of losing its grounding?
Oh, absolutely. It's a
Yep.
feeling I think a lot of people share.
Yeah, these topics that were once rarely discussed publicly are suddenly front and center, especially in Western societies.
Hmm.
And this explosion of new terms, new concepts, and norms shifting so fast,
Hmm.
it can really leave you wondering, where's the solid ground? Where does clear understanding even begin?
That's a really perceptive way to put it. It genuinely can feel like the language we use to understand ourselves and each other is just shifting under our feet.
Right.
And navigating that, especially when things get so emotionally charged, so ideologically rigid sometimes.
Yeah.
It takes more than just an open mind. It really requires, I think, a deep commitment to clarity, to nuance, and, well, ultimately to truth.
Precisely. And that's exactly why today we're doing a really crucial deep dive. We're looking into an essay that offers just that, a profound call for clarity. We're going to unpack this powerful, emotionally aware work by Oliver Werner Nightingale, who also uses the name McCurley. Now, he's a gay man, a community organizer, an intercultural educator, and a queer thought leader.
Right. So he's coming from within the community.
Exactly. That's what makes his voice so compelling right from the start. He speaks from within the LGBT+ movement, not as some opponent on the outside.
Hmm.
His perspective is really rooted in this profound sense of inner responsibility, for the future of his community. And he delivers it with a courageous, really clear tone. He's not about oversimplification, quite the opposite, actually. He wants differentiation.
That positioning is so pivotal, isn't it? As he puts it himself, he's someone who's been deeply involved. He's marched, he sat with youth in crisis, fought for dignity in many rooms where it wasn't easy to claim it.
Yeah.
So this isn't some abstract critique. It's coming from lived experience, speaking directly to challenges he sees within the movement he's part of.
Hmm.
And you can feel the care in it, the desire to see it thrive responsibly.
So our mission today is really to unpack Nightingale's core thesis. He lays it out very precisely. He argues that LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual is fundamentally rooted in biological sexual orientation.
Okay, biological orientation.
Right. But in stark contrast, T+, that's trans, non-binary, gender fluid, etc., is primarily about gender identity and subjective self-perception.
Ah, okay. So orientation versus identity perception.
Yes. And here's the critical part that really needs attention. He says these are fundamentally distinct concepts, and they must not be politically or medically conflated, especially when it comes to kids.
Right. The implications for children are a major focus.
Absolutely. We'll explore his urgent call for clarity, for truth, for robust child protection, and for a thoughtful reevaluation of current queer activism. He wants to resist silence on problematic trends, but also resist oversimplifying complex human experiences. It's not about exclusion, he stresses, it's about integrity.
It forces us to ask a really fundamental question, doesn't it? How do we hold space for all these diverse experiences and identities, genuinely, while also keeping a firm grasp on foundational realities, biological, social, psychological?
Yeah.
That's the tightrope he's walking, advocating for this nuanced understanding that he believes is just essential for the long-term health, the public credibility, and ultimately the acceptance of the broader queer movement.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. He begins with what he calls the shifting landscape of visibility and dynamics. And it's hard to deny, isn't it? Over the last, say, 10, 15 years, we've seen this, almost explosive surge in public visibility around trans identity topics, particularly in the West.
It really is unprecedented.
Hmm?
Things that were maybe confined to academic circles or very specific activist groups or, private support networks,
Exactly.
they've moved right into the mainstream public square with incredible speed. We're talking education policy, medical guidelines, huge media campaigns, even corporate marketing. It's everywhere.
The sheer speed of it is striking. What was often a very private journey, maybe a marginalized experience, has become so public, almost omnipresent, in a relatively short time.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just more awareness. It feels like a fundamental reorientation of public discourse, of institutional engagement.
Yeah, think about how many companies now have specific gender identity themes in their marketing certain times of the year.
Right.
Or how schools are dealing with complex discussions around pronouns, bathrooms, gender-affirming care right from kindergarten up. It's not occasional anymore. It's woven into daily life.
And Nadinger notes that for many people, both inside and outside the LGB community, this doesn't just feel like natural progression or simple acceptance growing.
Yeah.
He highlights that it often feels more like an ideologically charged movement, one that's heavily supported financially, politically, and culturally.
Right, so not just grassroots, but with significant backing.
Exactly. It appears to have substantial resources and a well-developed infrastructure driving its rapid mainstreaming.
That observation is really crucial for understanding his whole argument, isn't it?
I think so. It suggests powerful forces are at play, whether you see their intentions as good or problematic, actively pushing this shift. When the narrative changes that fast, on that scale, it usually indicates significant resources, coordination, effort behind it. Again, this isn't to dismiss the real experiences of trans individuals, but to look at the broader societal machinery propelling the movement's prominence.
And within this visibility surge, there's one phenomenon he finds particularly striking and, well, concerning: the rise of what he calls trans influencers, dominating platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. You really do see them everywhere.
There's a kind of symbiotic relationship there, isn't there? Social media rewards performance, quick consumption, visual spectacle.
Yeah.
It's almost perfectly suited for a certain kind of influencer culture, where self-expression can easily become a curated performance.
And he describes their characteristics quite pointedly. He mentions often theatrical performances, aggressive self-promotion, and what he calls questionable authenticity. It's not just sharing raw personal stories. It's often about deliberately cultivating a public persona, highly stylized, often dramatic, designed for maximum engagement, for going viral.
You know, those highly choreographed dances or exaggerated emotional displays meant to get sympathy and shares.
Exact.
Which brings up that critical question about representation today. When the public face of a community is driven more by performance than quiet, authentic experience, what happens?
Well, these individuals often claim, implicitly or explicitly, to speak for a whole community they don't actually represent in its full diversity. They get the spotlight because they're the loudest, maybe the most visually compelling, or just the best at gaming the algorithms.
Right.
And the consequence, he points out, is pretty profound and troubling from his perspective. While these influencers get massive attention, sponsorships, funding, this media-savvy spectacle often pushes aside the genuine, quieter, less flashy lived experiences of many, many trans people. He argues the true diversity of trans experience, the struggles, the quiet triumphs, the mundane daily life, the private nature of many transitions, it just gets overshadowed by this curated, monetized, often sensationalized version.
It creates such a distorted mirror for the public, doesn't it? The perception of trans identity gets heavily skewed by this small, highly performative group. It makes it much harder for the authentic, unadorned stories, the ones without the glitter and drama, to actually break through.
Yeah, it's classic loudest voices dominating the narrative, regardless of how representative they are.
And what's particularly poignant for Nineker is the impact this specific kind of visibility has on the LGB community itself.
How so?
Well, for many longtime members, this performative visibility feels profoundly disempowering. And he's emphatic. It's not because it's too bold or too visible. It's because it feels based on spectacle, on superficiality, rather than authentic truth and shared human experience. It feels like their own hard-won visibility, the public's understanding of their realities, is being undermined by something lacking. Well, integrity, in his view.
That really highlights a deep tension within what used to feel like a more unified movement.
Absolutely. If a big part of the public face is seen as inauthentic, performative, commercially driven, it naturally creates disconnect, even alienation, for those who fought for decades for a different kind of visibility, one rooted in shared human experience, love, challenging real discrimination, not what he calls a grab bag of role fantasies.
So, given this confused landscape, how do you even begin to explain it without losing credibility? That takes us to Section 2, the permitted discourse and its boundaries. Nightinger draws a really clear, stark contrast here.
It's quite striking, the distinction he makes, juxtaposing what's easily understood, rooted in shared experience, with what becomes deeply confusing for many.
He paints this picture: two men loving each other, getting married, that makes sense. Universally comprehensible, right? Affection, family, human connection, a lived reality that resonates. And crucially, he says, it's explainable, even to someone new to queer lives. It's rooted in human emotion, desire for partnership, connects to a biological reality of same-sex attraction most people can grasp, even if they don't share it. Deeply human, relatable, explainable.
That's a key point for him. The original LGB narrative centered on specific biologically rooted sexual orientation and the universal desire for love, partnership, family within that.
Right.
That relatability built empathy. created a pathway to acceptance over decades, making something inherently human understandable to the rest of humanity.
But then he presents the contrast that, in his view, makes the whole conversation collapse. He says, but when, in the same breath, someone says, I'm gender fluid, trigender, a trans lesbian, and I feel like a cat today, the conversation collapses.
Wow.
You don't just lose your audience, you fundamentally lose your credibility. He argues this isn't a subtle difference, it's a complete breakdown in communication, where the public just can't follow the logic or, well, the perceived reality.
It raises that critical question about the limits of public discourse. What can actually be integrated into broad societal understanding?
Exactly.
When concepts get too abstract, too fluid, or venture into territory that defies common understanding or accepted biological observation, the ability to build those bridges of empathy just diminishes.
Right?
Yeah. It shifts from a shared language of human experience to what feels like a very private, insular language that doesn't translate, causes disconnect, confusion.
And the consequence of this conflation, as Nightinger sees it, is devastating. What was once a clear movement about love, biological reality, equal rights for specific orientations becomes what he bluntly calls, quote, a grab bag of role fantasies, self-invention, and at times grotesque identities. The original purpose and integrity of the LGB movement gets diluted, distorted beyond recognition in his emphasis.
That term grab bag is evocative. Not a curated collection of diverse identities, but a chaotic, random assortment thrown together without a unifying principle, clear definitions, clear boundaries. And when a movement loses its unifying principle, if core message gets fragmented, it risks losing focus, clarity, and its ability to advocate effectively for its original aims. It gets diluted until it's unrecognizable.
And here's the kicker, the point he makes with real frustration. How all these disparate identities, these different phenomena, are sold under the same rainbow banner as if it were the same.
The symbol itself.
Yeah. When he argues emphatically, it is not the same. It's a marketing and branding problem as much as an ideological one, he thinks, stretching a symbol of unity to cover concepts that inherently lack it.
The rainbow banner was adopted as a symbol of unity and diversity for a very specific struggle, LGBT rights, rooted in sexual orientation. When that same symbol is used for concepts perceived as fundamentally different, it creates internal tension. And, as he fears, can lead to that loss of public credibility. It forces a false equivalence, making it harder for people to grasp what the movement truly stands for.
Which leads him to this really courageous statement. One he knows might be controversial, but he feels is essential. LGB is real. TQ+ is often ideological, diffuse, or psychologically explainable.
That takes courage, especially from within the movement.
Absolutely.
He's not dismissing TQ+ identities outright there. He's trying to categorize them differently, based on perceived origins and nature.
Right.
LGB rooted in discernible, often biological reality of attraction. TQ+, in his observation, often stemming from conceptual frameworks, diffuse self-perceptions, complex psychological factors, needing different understanding, different approaches, maybe different societal and medical responses. It's a call for intellectual honesty.
So, what's the stake here? For the movement, for acceptance, he warns starkly. If we can no longer name the difference, we will inevitably lose the acceptance so many fought hard to earn. This connects right back to your desire, listener, for clarity, for avoiding overload. If the movement can't articulate its own distinctions, how can the public understand, accept, support it? The hard-won gains are genuinely at risk.
It really speaks to the pragmatic consequence of ideological overreach, conceptual fuzziness. Public acceptance isn't automatic. It's hard-won over decades of education, understanding, relatability.
Yeah.
If the discourse becomes too complex, too abstract, seemingly disconnected from widely understood realities, that acceptance can erode fast. It's a deeply concerned warning from someone who cares about the movement's future.
Which brings us neatly to Section 3, Global Context, UK, USA, and the warning from Germany and Europe. It's so important to look beyond one region here.
Definitely.
In the Anglosphere, particularly the UK, there's been this significant, really consequential reevaluation of approaches to gender identity and care for minors.
The Tavistock Clinic closure in the UK, that was huge. More than just clinical restructuring, it was a monumental signal that the prevailing approach to youth gender care was under serious scrutiny. A real turning point.
And that scrutiny was formalized by the Cass Review, comprehensive, independent, led by Dr. Hilary Cass, a respected pediatrician. After a thorough investigation, the review clearly stated, And this is from the source material. We did too much, too fast, with too little scientific basis.
Wow, that's a powerful indictment from within the medical establishment, admitting a systemic failure of evidence-based practice.
It really is.
And it raises that huge ethical question, doesn't it? When scientific basis is lacking, yet irreversible, life-altering interventions proceed rapidly. What are the implications? Especially for kids and teens. The CAST review's findings are a stark reminder that even well-intentioned pathways can outpace evidence, captured by ideology, with potentially devastating results. It's a call for pause, rigorous research, cautious care.
And it's not just the UK. In the US, we're seeing similar, though maybe more fractured shifts. Multiple states limiting or banning hormonal and surgical interventions on minor.
Yeah, reflecting growing concerns there too.
And beyond medicine, schools, institutions rethinking pronoun policies, bathroom access, curriculum content. It's a broad reassessment.
These developments in the UK and US certainly suggest the pendulum is shifting away from an uncritical affirmation-only model.
Right.
Nightinger's interpretation is that these shifts represent a necessary reining in of ideological excess, driven not by hate, he argues, but by responsibility towards children, safeguarding their well-being, ensuring practices are evidence-based, ethical.
But here's the stark contrast. The cautionary tale points to Germany and much of the EU seem to be moving the other way.
Really? Opposite direction.
Yeah. While others adopt caution, Germany particularly seems to be accelerating towards uncritical affirmation.
Yep.
Pushing new self-ID laws, for instance, changing legal gender just by self-declaration, no assessment needed.
Wow.
New educational guidelines mandating certain approaches, pronoun mandates, language policies, strong cultural pressure to affirm, even for very young kids.
That is a striking divergence. Same societal discussions, rising concerns about youth gender distress, but radically different responses. Some pulling back to reassess evidence, others doubling down on affirmation, often without that same level of scientific review. Suggests different cultural, political priorities, maybe?
And this acceleration, Nightinger describes vividly, has led to a noticeable narrowing of the political and media landscape in Central Europe.
How so?
Criticism of the prevailing narrative, even thoughtful criticism from within the queer community, often gets morally downgraded, dismissed as bigotry. So differentiated voices, those calling for nuance, caution, alternatives. They're losing funding, platforms, reach. The space for open debate is shrinking fast.
That highlights that chilling effect of a narrowing discourse. When nuanced voices get silenced, marginalized, demonized, it stifles intellectual debate, prevents healthy self-correction in a movement. The pressure to conform becomes intense.
Leading to what he starkly calls an affirm or be discarded dynamic.
Yeah.
If you don't fully agree, you risk being cast out.
Right. If you question, ask for data, caution. You're immediately labeled reactionary, hateful, transphobic.
Exactly. It creates an environment where critical thinking is punished, conformity rewarded, which he argues is detrimental to any movement seeking broad understanding and progress.
And that dynamic, embedded in policy and culture, has huge real-world consequences, especially for vulnerable people and for the public's ability to engage reasonably. It removes space for crucial discussions on safety, well-being, ethics, child protection topics needing utmost rigor and deliberation.
And while these intense debates happen in the West, Nightinger offers this critical global perspective, a powerful reminder of a profound disparity.
It's okay.
He reminds us, around the world, LGB and trans people are still fighting for the most basic rights: to live, work, love, exist without facing horrific violence, criminalization, erasure.
Right. Uganda, Russia, Saudi Arabia, parts of India, places where just existing as queer can be a death sentence, where identity isn't a debate, it's a struggle for survival.
It powerfully underscores the immense privilege in the West, doesn't it? Where our discussions have moved beyond basic survival to these incredibly complex identity debates.
As he puts it, queer existence elsewhere is not a gender game, not a linguistic exercise. It's a constant battle for mere survival. That perspective really forces us to see our Western debates through a humbling lens.
And it highlights his critique of the West, basking in its own perceived progress, often in a self-referential echo chamber.
While Western activists debate pronoun nuances or multiplying labels,
Queer people elsewhere fear imprisonment or death for just existing. It's a jarring disconnect.
it raises that question about perspective, proportionality, humility. Are Western activists focusing so intensely on nuanced identity politics, losing sight of broader, urgent human rights struggles globally? It's a plea for a wider lens, more compassion beyond our often insular circles.
So what does this mean for us in these privileged contexts? He argues Western LGBT+ individuals are among the most privileged queer individuals globally. Access to rights, language, platforms, protection unimaginable elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's good, he stresses, this immense privilege comes with the profound responsibility for moderation, for humility, for maintaining perspective. It should lead to connection, not alienation.
That's a powerful appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Privilege isn't a license for ideological excess or dogmatism. It brings a moral obligation to be thoughtful, measured, grounded in reality, connected to broader human experience, not become insular, rigid, detached. A plea for mature, responsible activism using privilege for the greater good, not squandering it on internal battles.
Now, let's really dive into Section 4. LGBT plus why the distinction matters. For Nightinger and many thoughtful critics within the community, this is the core fractal line, the source of confusion and harm. Conflating sexual orientation with gender identity, he sees them as fundamentally different dimensions.
The historical and definitional clarity he's seeking here is absolutely critical to his argument. He takes us back to the LGBT movement's origins,
Right.
reminding us it fought for recognition based on sexual orientation, something specific, physical, and biologically rooted. That was the bedrock.
Yes. He emphasizes sexual orientation is well-researched and has clear social and medical relevance. Not a fluid concept open to daily redefinition, in his view. Anchored in discernible biological reality, attraction to same or opposite sex, rooted in physical, neurological phenomena extensively studied.
That biological anchor provides a stable reference point. The struggles for gay and lesbian rights, often involving huge sacrifice, were about acknowledging a specific innate aspect of biology and its expression in love relationships. That clear, consistent, biologically grounded foundation allowed concrete legal and social battles, built public understanding, won significant victories like marriage equality, anti-discrimination laws.
But then he contrasts this sharply with T+ identities, trans, non-binary, queer, agender, etc. He defines T+ as referring to gender identity, a subjective, often fluid self-perception, heavily shaped by language, culture, social media, and profound psychological factors.
Ah, okay. That's where the critical distinction must be drawn, he argues. The crucial differentiation. Sexual orientation, who you're attracted to based on biological sex, versus gender identity, your internal sense of self as man, woman, both, neither, etc.
And he says, with unwavering conviction, these are two entirely different dimensions of human experience, wrongly unified and politically conflated under one expansive political umbrella. Their different nature means they need distinct understanding.
So what does this mean personally for someone like Nadinger, a gay man? This perceived misalignment has a real impact.
Absolutely. He observes that if you're just gay-to-day identity rooted simply in same-sex attraction, you're often seen as worth nothing in activist circles unless you uncritically align with the big media-friendly horn of trans ideology. He sees a disheartening shift from who you love, a deep human truth, to how spectacularly and ideologically you perform your identity.
That speaks to a profound sense of devaluation, even marginalization, felt by many within the LGBT community, especially longtime activists. Their experience, victories, struggles, history, perceived as being sidelined, diminished by a newer, media-dominant, ideologically prescriptive narrative. It implies a hierarchy emerging within the movement itself.
And this leads to a broader, more insidious problem: the silencing of LGB voices.
Oh, so?
He details this pervasive feeling among longtime fighters. Their concerns, stories, daily realities are vanishing, lost in a fog of ever-multiplying gender labels and complex, often ill-defined constructs. And adding insult to injury, this erasure is compounded by a real fear of being immediately branded hostile, hateful, transphobic just for asking thoughtful questions, seeking differentiation, or expressing concerns not perfectly aligned with the dominant narrative.
That raises a huge question about internal cohesion, intellectual honesty, the health of a movement. When those on the front lines for decades feel their concerns are dismissed, or they can't even ask questions without fear of reprisal, ostracism, it signals a dangerous breakdown in healthy internal discourse. Undermines the diversity of thought a progressive movement should champion.
And to drive this home, he integrates a direct quote from the LGB Alliance, known for this internal critique. They state, "Sex is real, immutable, and important. Conflating same-sex attraction with gender identity fundamentally undermines the rights of LGB people. He carefully emphasizes, this isn't from an external adversary, it's internal, from within the community it seeks to clarify and protect.
That's significant. It's not an attack from outside. It's an impassioned plea for integrity, specificity, self-preservation from those who feel their identity, rights, visibility are being dangerously diluted by a broader, undefined, ideologically driven umbrella. It reinforces the core idea. The LGB movement was built on biologically observable reality, sex, and sexual orientation. And that bedrock, they feel, is being compromised with potentially devastating consequences.
Which takes us to Section 5. Help, not hype, when identity becomes performance. Nightinger draws a sharp distinction between past queer activism and today's landscape.
Right.
Past activism, he reminds us, was uncomfortable, a direct confrontation with real, often brutal oppression, frequently undertaken at immense personal risk. Genuine struggle, survival, fighting for dignity, often at huge personal cost.
That historical context is vital. Early activism was about survival, basic dignity against widespread discrimination, violence, even death. Not fame, brand deals, money. It was about liberation from oppression, the right to exist and love without fear.
But today he argues with palpable concern. Claiming trans identity and delivering a bit of drama can open the floodgates to fame and fortune, especially on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram.
A completely different dynamic.
The profound shift from grassroots struggle to online spectacle. The incentive structure has fundamentally changed, he notes.
It really raises that troubling question about the commodification of identity itself. When self-expression or presenting an identity becomes monetized, driven by engagement metrics, there's a huge risk authenticity gets replaced by calculated performance.
Yeah, performance for clicks, likes, shares, profit. Not connection, understanding, advocacy. The incentives change everything.
And he names specific figures to illustrate his critique. Like Dylan Mulvaney saying he's praised for girlhood, while real women wonder if they now have to dance and squeak to be considered valid.
That's not just about superficiality, is it? It's concern about arguably regressive stereotypical performances, potentially undermining feminist progress against those very stereotypes.
It speaks directly to a growing concern among many women and gender-critical feminists that certain public presentations of trans identity, especially male to female, can inadvertently reinforce harmful, regressive gender stereotypes caricatures women fought against, leading to disempowerment, even erasure for women who challenge those stereotypes. It's a complex, often painful intersection.
Then there's Nikita Dragun, highlighted as thriving on scandal and spectacle, not substance. Her brand built on controversy drama rather than genuine representation or meaningful discourse. An entertainment model, not advocacy.
That type of influencer relies on shock value, novelty, perpetual controversy to stay relevant online. It's a business model first, not necessarily genuine reflection or constructive dialogue. Often confuses sensitive topics rather than clarifying.
And Jeffrey Marsh, he expresses particularly concern there. Specific messaging to vulnerable kids with coaching offers and an aesthetic that raises deep ethical concerns. Pointing to potential exploitation of young, confused individuals seeking identity, belonging. Commercializing such guidance, especially for kids, is deeply troubling.
The ethical concerns around advising, coaching, influencing vulnerable kids on identity are huge, especially when tied to monetization or a specific persona. Raises serious questions about professional standards, undue influence, whether it's truly in the child's best interest or the influencer's brand and profit.
And finally, Lily Tino, described as turning gender expression into a monetized lifestyle brand, encapsulating the broader critique. Identity, a deeply personal journey, reduced to a product sold in the online attention market.
What's consistently highlighted is this unsettling transformation. Personal identity complex, vulnerable becoming a public, consumable, profitable entity. When identity becomes a brand, authenticity inevitably gets diluted by market demands, constant content needs, the pursuit of clicks.
And here's a particularly sharp, unsettling observation he makes. These figures, despite often dramatic, self-serving performances, speak constantly about trans kids. But, he clarifies with sadness, not out of genuine care or shared struggle with them. Instead, he argues, these children make the perfect moral shield. The implication is devastating kids as a rhetorical device.
That is a powerful, unsettling accusation, suggesting the vulnerability, innocence, societal empathy for children are strategically leveraged, exploited to shut down criticism and gain unquestioning affirmation for controversial, often unscientific positions.
Right.
The implication, if you claim to protect trans kids, you're always right no matter how hollow the content or questionable the motives. An almost impenetrable shield making dissent seem morally reprehensible, hateful.
So what does this mean for genuine diversity and understanding? He argues these figures don't truly stand for diversity in its nuanced sense. They cultivate a performance culture where every label, every tier, every new identity is meticulously crafted for clickbait, shareable, monetizable. They speak incessantly of care but carry no real responsibility for long-term well-being, he observes. And critically, they demand absolute respect but leave absolutely no room for any dissent.
It raises that fundamental question about activism's integrity in the digital age. If it devolves into performative commercial enterprise, stifling critique, monetizing identity, prioritizing clicks over well-being, its effectiveness, ethics, integrity are severely compromised. It becomes entertainment with damaging real-world consequences.
And perhaps the most tragic impact, he points out, is on real trans people, the quiet ones, the thoughtful ones, the ones who've lived through profound pain, immense struggle, deeply personal transformation.
Yeah.
They're being pushed aside, he says sorrowfully. Authentic stories supplanted by glitter, ephemeral likes, rigid ideology, nuanced realities invisible under the glare of performativity.
That's arguably his most poignant critique. The very individuals the movement aims to serve navigating agonizing journeys, overshadowed, erased by a public spectacle not reflecting their genuine, quiet, complex experiences. A powerful call to recenter the quieter, more profound journeys beyond social media's glare.
Now, let's turn to Section 6. Biology, medicine, and sport reality matters. Nightinger doesn't shy away from fundamental biological realities, especially their role in competitive sports.
Right. The objective measurable factors. We're talking skeletal structure, influencing leverage, muscle mass impacting strength, heart volume, lung capacity dictating endurance, oxygen capacity affecting output, not subjective feelings, inherent biological attributes conferring distinct advantages.
And the consequences are clear, he argues, for fair competition. When biologically male bodies compete against women, structural advantages emerge regardless of personal identity. It's about physical realities of a male-developed body, persisting even after hormones. Differences often not negated by identity change or medical intervention.
Raises that huge question about fairness, integrity, women's sports as a protected category. If biological sex differences are ignored, the integrity of categories designed for fair competition for biological females is undermined. Women's sports, established precisely for these differences, risk becoming meaningless.
And he includes that powerful quote from Sharon Davies, former Olympian, advocate for women's sports. "I've fought for fair women's sports for 20 years. If we ignore biological reality, women lose their opportunities, their medals, and their voice."
A direct, heartfelt plea from someone who lived it.
Yeah.
It powerfully articulates the tangible losses for women if biology isn't respected in sports.
Yeah.
Not about excluding trans athletes entirely, but advocating fair categories respecting biological differences to protect female opportunities hard-won against sexism, ensuring equity for biological females.
Beyond sport, he highlights biology being equally critical in medical prevention and care. It's about health outcomes, responsible patient care. Our bodies, based on birth sex, have different predispositions, risks, need different screenings.
The necessity of sex-specific medical considerations is fundamental. Ignoring biological realities for gender identity can lead to inadequate, inappropriate, harmful care. Missing crucial prevention, misdiagnosing conditions because underlying biology isn't fully accounted for.
He explicitly mentions risks persisting for trans men: breast cancer, uterine diseases, osteoporosis, concerns remaining, needing monitoring, even with hormones or surgeries. Biological organs or their past influence matter.
Underscores that even with medical transitions, underlying biological realities persist at cellular anatomical levels. Organs like breast uterus in trans men retain risks needing screening. Prostate health remains a consideration for trans women. Care must be comprehensive, nuanced, grounded in both identity and biology.
Similarly, for trans women, he lists increased risks: prostate cancer, cardiovascular issues under long-term hormones, significant health considerations needing diligent monitoring, clear understanding.
Very real implications. Hormone therapy, vital for many, doesn't erase all biological differences or risks. Long-term consequences need careful monitoring, research, candid communication, especially as interventions spread among younger people.
And he includes a sobering quote from Professor Dr. Miroslav Dorjevich, a surgeon specializing in gender surgeries. The long-term consequences of hormonal and surgical interventions in youth are not sufficiently studied. As a surgeon, I increasingly see cases of regret, especially in very young patients.
A powerful cautionary voice from someone doing these procedures, seeing real outcomes,
Yeah?
raises serious questions about informed consent, especially for irreversible interventions on minors. When long-term data is insufficient and experience shows regret, extreme caution is demanded, an ethical imperative to prioritize long-term welfare over ideological pressure or social contagion.
So what does this mean for society? Nadinger emphasizes medicine, sport, public safety shouldn't be based solely on felt identity, subjective fluid, but on clear, biologically informed guidelines.
Mm.
Not to exclude, he stresses, but to ensure fairness, responsibility, and profound care for all, especially the vulnerable.
Highlights that critical balance society needs. Affirming identity is important, but can't come at the expense of objective biological realities impacting safety, fairness, responsible medical care. Integrating multiple truths, subjective experience, and objective biology, not privileging one to society's detriment.
Finally, Section 7, policy demands for a differentiated future. Neidinger offers concrete steps for a more responsible, humane, sustainable future. His core demands reflect his commitment to clarity and protecting vulnerable groups.
They're very practical and pointed, aren't they? Reflecting his concern for truth and protecting those he sees as most vulnerable, especially kids.
First demand, uncompromising. No medical interventions under 18. A clear line prioritizing developing minds and bodies over ideology or social pressure. Aligns with CAS review caution, U.S. state shifts, recognizing irreversibility and lack of long-term data for children.
Fundamentally rooted in protecting children from irreversible decisions before maturity. Emphasizes prudence, caution, long-term well-being over rapid affirmation. Childhood for exploration, development, not permanent medicalization of complex distress.
Second, legal separation of LGB from T+ in official structures. Back to his core thesis. Distinct categories. Conflation causes confusion, dilutes LGB movement's meaning, undermines unique struggles and rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals, believes their specific rights are being erased.
Raises that important question about legal architecture. If they're fundamentally different orientation versus identities, separate legal frameworks might be necessary, strategically vital. Defining distinct rights without diluting either, providing clarity.
Third, crucial for any healthy society. Open debate without ideological censorship.
Yes.
If challenging questions, dissenting voices, different perspectives, especially from within, are systematically silenced, demonized, true understanding, progress, self-correction become impossible. A movement intolerant of internal criticism risks losing its way.
A passionate call for intellectual honesty, academic rigor. A robust movement should withstand scrutiny. Shutting down debate, equating dissent with malice, signals focus on maintaining ideological lines over truth-seeking, progress, complex human realities, stifles intellectual vitality.
And fourth, protect those who don't seek the spotlight, speaking directly to the silent majority, quiet ones whose lives, struggles, stories are overshadowed by performative influencers, ideological spectacle, a call for genuine care, responsibility over hype, attention-seeking.
A deeply compassionate, ethical imperative for any movement representing diverse people. Focus on genuine well-being, needs, dignity of all, especially the vulnerable, not just those adept at navigating media or politics. Genuine care often happens quietly, away from public performance.
Okay, that brings us to our outro, final reflection. As we wrap up, it's so important to reiterate Neidinger's stance. He writes, he emphasizes not as an opponent, but as part of the LGB community. Crucially, not from the outside, but from within. This gives his words immense weight, authenticity, responsibility.
Understanding his position is key. He's not attacking the movement. His intent is to refine, clarify tenets, strengthen it from deep personal commitment, concern for its integrity, credibility, ability to genuinely serve members.
And he consistently brings us back to that central distinction. LGB stands for biological reality and sexual orientation. T+ stands for psychological self-perception, firm belief. Both can coexist, recognized, respected, but must not be conflated, blurred. Differentiation isn't judgment, but intellectual honesty, necessary clarity.
Differentiation isn't exclusion, he argues. It's recognizing distinct phenomena, one rooted in discernible biology, the other often in subjective experience, psychology. A call for rigor, precision, compassionate honesty within identity complexities.
He issues a stark warning. A movement that wants to be everything risks losing its compass. When boundaries blur every identity under one umbrella, it risks losing core purpose, historical meaning, strategic direction, becoming so diffuse it stands for nothing specific.
Raises that strategic question about broad, undifferentiated ideology's efficacy. If focus is lost, core mission, constituencies unclear, it becomes less effective advocating distinct needs. Speaks to the strength and specificity, clarity, not endless expansion.
So what does this mean for you, our listener? Nightinger expresses this deep desire for a return to biological clarity, to responsible, evidence-based care for children, and to respectful, truly honest conversations about topics that have become untouchable.
Yeah.
Wants to strip away fear, ideological rigidity, moral accusations, stifling dialogue, allow genuine, compassionate, fact-based discussion to reemerge.
A passionate plea for fundamental principles: truth, accountability, careful consideration, open communication, especially with children's well-being at stake. Courageously challenges the notion some topics are beyond critical discussion in a free society. A call to rebuild understanding.
And he leaves us with these powerful, concise statements for reflection, mantras almost. First, identity is complex, but truth must not be sacrificed, holding subjective experience and objective reality in careful balance.
That crucial balance, both vital, but truth, he argues, is a non-negotiable bedrock, cannot be compromised for feeling or ideology.
Second, to differentiate is not to exclude. To protect is not to hate. Directly addressing fear of being labeled hateful for making distinctions. Emphasizes critical thinking, boundaries, caution, are acts of care, responsibility, not malice.
A vital framework. Engaging complex issues without simplistic love versus hate polarization. Proposes responsible differentiation, protection, especially for vulnerable, are not animosity, but essential, compassionate aspects of genuine care.
And third, potent. To seek clarity is not to oppose diversity, but to protect its integrity. True diversity thrives on clear understanding, defined categories, not murky blending. Clarity enhances diversity by allowing each identity to be understood, respected for what it is.
Counterintuitive yet powerful. True diversity enhanced by clarity, distinction, without conflating into a homogeneous mass, losing definition meaning.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, Nightinger's insights, consider these words. It's time for differentiation, for open debate, for responsibility. Children and youth deserve reality, not ideology. Responsibility means look closely, speak honestly, draw boundaries. What do these words mean for your understanding, your engagement with these complex, often charged societal discussions? It's a powerful call for all of us to be more discerning, more truthful, maybe more courageous in how we approach these vital conversations.